right, so a thing I want to go over today, I kind of waffled on whether or not I just wanted to show you guys how to throw something bigger than you're used to, which we will go over, but I kind of want to issue a challenge to everybody. This is sort of what I call like the 1, 2, 3 challenge, right? So what I have here is roughly the same shape thrown with 3 different size increments of clay. This is done with 1 pound. This one here is done with 2 pounds, and then this one here is done with 3 pounds, right? Almost like a little nesting bowl set. And the point of it really is I want, especially with the 1 pound size, I really want you guys to see how much volume you can get out of a 1 pound piece of clay, right? So this, like when it's finished firing, will hold like 20 ounces. That's much more than the mugs we usually make with 1 pound. And when I was throwing this is really as big as I could get this thing. You can feel it, it's like relatively light. I did very minimal trimming because I didn't have a lot to work with here. But my whole focus here is sort of like you know me, like chawan, like Japanese tea bowl shape, right? You can get a ton of volume, like a lot of cup out of 1 pound of clay. Is sort of the point, the takeaway that I want you guys to practice on, right? So try this just in like your own practice, but like if you can, I'm gonna go over, I might just start with the 3 pound one and then let you guys sort of do your thing. I'll be making the 2 pound and the 1 pound as we go. But practice this, like try to make sort of the same pot, but just a bigger version of it. I didn't make this one that tall because I couldn't imagine a very good use for something super wide and super tall, so I made it more of a bowl. But it's a good sort of practice element, to try to practice repetition, like trying to throw and trim the same shape multiple times is actually very, very difficult. And then B, also just seeing how much you can get out of each sort of increment of clay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's what I want you guys to do this week if you have time, right? I know we're coming down to the last little bit of our class. I'm going to start off by throwing a 3 pound bowl. I'm going to see, this one I kind of tried to keep vertical because I ended up vertical over here. I want to see how much bowl I can get out of this, how wide we can go, right? Before it starts to give up on me. So I've got 3 pounds. The process of throwing a 3 pound bowl, a little bit different than throwing like a 1 or 1.5 pound bowl, you know what I mean? I should be able to get like a pretty decent sized thing out of this. So clay is all rounded on all edges, right? So when I throw it down, it flattens on the bottom and it doesn't trap any air. I see how close to center I got. I'm relatively close, but not exactly on it. I usually do like a sort of cone smack, right? Then I'll come in here and I'll seal this bottom corner here. And now I know before when we were throwing, we sort of roughly went over the like coning up, smashing down thing, right? If you're throwing like 1 pound to 2 pounds, I don't find it super important. You can really get away with the like chair karate chop method. For anything bigger than that, I like cannot center unless I squish everything up and then squash it back down like 4 or 5 times. So this is sort of like, we call it wheel wedging or coning, right? Depending on how you want to, what your verbiage is going to be. What it's doing is just basically aligning all those clay molecules so that they like stack on top of each other better, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, shoot.
So the base, I'm looking at the base of your cone.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really if you wanted something to be wider at the bottom, you'd have to have a wider base, right? You can't throw bigger than wider than your base?
Yeah, but I can adjust what shape this is when I'm centering it, right? This is just like the very first slam down of it. It's like, there's a bunch of work that needs to go into it still, right? So I'm gonna take this here, and usually the first thing I do on a big piece of clay is I try to just sort of muscle it closer to the middle. You could see like my bottom was sort of all over the place when it was spinning. It's still way off center, right? So what I try to do there is I'll come in with like sort of the chair thing on the left hand, and then the right hand kind of does the same thing on the right side, and I'm just leaning forward into it just to get it closer to center, right? So it's sort of the chair karate chop. There's no karate chop here. My thumbs sort of act as my top down pressure, and I'm just leaning into it, elbows locked into myself. So I'm like relatively close to center here, but I know the inside's sort of all over the place just because there's so much clay, right? So now I'm gonna do the coning up, smashing down thing, or the wheel wedging. Try to do like a cruise control setting on my wheel here, right? Now when I do this, especially with a big piece of clay, left hand, chair hand's always sort of at this like 6 o'clock point, right? Pushing with this part of my hand. Right hand's gonna come over maybe 2 o'clock, kind of in the same motion, right? So I have like pressure here with this pad, I have pressure here with this pad. Does that make sense to people?
Is this recording?
Yeah.
Good.
Is it?
Is this the end?
We're recording on here?
I don't. Is this thing on?
Yes.
All right, we did it. So, pressure here. I know it's weird because I use 2 cameras and I only record from one of them. This is mainly just to stream it up there so you guys can have a better visual. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my sort of pad here, right? Chair hand left. I'm going to make another chair hand right on this side. And they're working across from each other. And then I'm going to squeeze those together. And as I squeeze them together, the clay is going to start to rise up in the middle, right? If I just squeeze this and kept squeezing it, the top's going to get all wonky and wobbly, right? So what I need to do is when I do the squeeze, I rise up with the squeeze up to about here, right? Then what I do here, and it's really evident that like, I did this I think on the first or second class, but it's kind of hard to see with a smaller piece of clay. To get this squashed back down, what I usually do is I take my like chair hand over here, and I lean this forward, and I have downwards, forward, and to the right sort of motion with my hand here. It'll like lean over, and then it'll line itself up under my hand. I don't know if, let's do that one more time so you guys can see. Like I'm not moving it back. It's just the like action of like pressing it down. It like will fold over and then sort of reincorporate itself. And the top is really easy to center, right? Just doing that centers the top almost perfectly. I'm actually gonna get this going just a smidge faster. So let's do this 1 or 2 more times. Squeezing up. Lining it back up under my thumb. Once I do that, I usually switch hands, right? I'm sort of doing a more intense version of the karate chop motion here, where I will, with my thumb, left hand's sort of chairing on the side just to create like sort of a jig so that the clay doesn't want to expand out super, super far. But I'll push down at a downward and left facing angle to get this centered. So it's like squeeze up, left hand pushes that way, and then right hand pushes that way. And that usually yields me pretty close to the center. So I usually do that 3 or 4 times, especially if this was like porcelain. Like I'd have to wedge it a bunch before I even started, and then I would spend like 5 minutes doing this because porcelain's really finicky. You have to sort of activate it. Luckily with this stoneware, it's pretty easy thrown, so we don't have to worry about it too much. So squeezing together, rising up. Left hand pushes downward to the right, get it to where it's lined up. Right hand pushes downward to the left. Let off easy, sort of jellyfish away, right? We've got like a relatively perfectly centered piece of clay. Does anyone have questions about that so far?
I always have trouble when I'm like pushing it back down and get this mushroom.
Yeah, me too.
So your hand, let me see if I can do that. So if you're getting a mushroom, is it like, what is your left hand doing while that's going on?
So I'm trying to like hold the side and then like create like a little shelf with my thumb so that I can hold it in place as I karate chop down.
So like this kind of thing, or?
No, not with my finger under it. Like that is on the clay, that like that.
Uh-huh.
But it's like closer to here, so I'm like creating a shelf here on the edge and then cupping it, and then I'm coming down.
Gotcha,
Does that
okay.
make sense?
So you're kind of doing this thing, and you're getting,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
like that?
Uh-huh.
I get that though, even when it's a disc. Like when I don't pull it up like that, when I just start. Like,
So what I do, I think you're hitting it too much downward motion and not enough like forward and
To the side,
like
yeah.
to the side motion, right? So when I do that, I'm like directly pushing that way. So when I do that, the whole thing comes down, and then once it gets most of the way down, I then turn this back into a chair to be a jig. You know what I mean? So you might be coming straight down too hard, and then it's just like waffling out, right? And the bottom's not it's not incorporating itself back in well enough.
Yeah.
When I'm doing it, I'm pushing down this way, and it has a tendency to not do that. I'm gonna do this one more time for posterity's sake. Thank you, Lum. Get here, right? Left hand pushes that way, it folds, it folds, it folds, it folds, it folds, it lines itself up. And we come down this way.
Are you using a good bit of strength doing that?
That one I do use a little bit of strength. Like the more clay you use, right, the more you have to sort of leverage your body in different ways. This is a tiny piece of clay I could just like all day. The bigger it gets, the more I have to sort of pivot my like the fulcrum of whatever this like lever is here so that I can get more pressure. If this is like 10-piece pound of clay, right? I would like really be angling my body so that I get the most downward pressure. But really, you want to angle your body in such ways and lock it into yourself to where it's not so much you using like arm strength as you like leaning in your body, because then I have like however much my body weighs of pressure pushing in on it, right? Because these are locked into my sides, and then I'm just sort of leaning into it. Does that make sense? Cool. So that's centering a 3-pound piece of clay. I'm going to flatten the top out just a bit. And if
When I get the mushroom, is at this point?
you get a mushroom when you're doing just chair karate chop?
Yeah, I do too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You might again be having like too much downward pressure, not enough sideways pressure, right? Sideways pressure is usually much more than downward. And then if ever I add downward pressure, the side is adding pressure too, so I'm basically just winding out in like a jig. So I think right around there is a good width for a bowl, right? I am going to trim this away a little bit, but that's a good starting point for width. So now I'm going to do my finger gun thing.
That's
Right.
so helpful.
Trace in from the outside just to find the very center. The more clay you use, it's harder to get good downward pressure with just your 2 fingers here, right? But I still do use this method to find where the very center is. And then I'll come in and I kind of just make like a V with my fingers, you know what I mean? And right there, I push that down. It's still like the same principle as doing this, and I can get away with doing this because this isn't a ton of clay. But just know that the more clay you use, you're going to have to get sort of creative with how you drop, because like your thumbs alone won't have enough pressure, your 2 fingers alone won't have enough pressure. I usually, on a big piece of clay, open up with my whole hand, right? So we're going to get down sort of that Potter thickness, right, that 1/4 inch. And then one of the main differences, right, between throwing a cylinder and throwing a bowl, if I was throwing a cylinder has a flat bottom and then straight walls, right? A bowl sort of has a smooth parabolic curve at the inside. So when we throw bowls as potters, most of the time we're actually just trying to throw the inside shape to look good, because we can adjust the outside shape with trimming, you know what I mean? Sort of the antithesis of when you throw a cylinder, the inside shape is kind of like not as important as the outside shape. Does that make sense? But the main focus of a bowl, because it's so open, is that sort of inside. So I'm not actually going to do the like flat claw thing that I would usually do to sort of open it up flat. What I'm going to do is from here, I'm just going to do some compression so that I don't get any sort of S cracking, right? This also lets me sort of adjust that shape so it's like a smooth parabolic curve.
You're not pressing it down in the middle because you already have your.
I am pressing down, I'm just not pressing down with enough force to like gouge in. It's more of like pushing clay from the side to where it like compresses the middle, right? So we get to about here. Can everyone see that okay? And I start pulling from here, right? Because I have my base wide enough, I can like just start doing pulls. When I initiate pulls, caught it. It's almost like I've been doing this for a second.
My pulls are pretty much doo-doo.
When I initiate pulls, I still want to pull with upward motion, right? But when I'm pulling a cylinder, what I'm really trying to do is pull inward so that I end up with a cone, so that it eventually, centrifugal force turns it into a cylinder, right? With this, what I'm going to try to do is kind of pull a cylinder shape, because the wheel spinning is going to sort of naturally pull it into a bowl shape, and then I'll refine that bowl shape. So point being, don't start by pulling out to the side. You're not going to get enough height out of your bowl, right? You start tall, and then you widen. So let me get this all saturated again. I'm going to come in from the outside. And then we're doing a pull. Usually on the inside, if I was doing a cylinder, my finger here sort of makes a claw so that I can claw in on both sides and pull up. This one, because I want to keep that sort of smooth curve, I sort of skate along it with pressure with the pads of my fingers. I don't quite claw as much because I don't want a flat part. Does that make sense? So like instead of the inside finger going like, huh, and then pulling up, it's like a ooh, like that. Just remember to do the
And
ooh.
you're pushing from underneath on the outside.
On the outside, always, yeah. Well, like because there's a floor, right? Your inside hand is automatically going to be higher than your outside hand, right? So just go as low as you can on the inside and the outside. Your outside hand will always be lower. We're going to do that a couple more times.
Sometimes I'll have sort of, it'll start out fine,
Uh-huh.
and then there'll be like a lump Is it just because I released the pressure, I didn't have consistent pressure?
There'll be a lump
You know,
where.
like there'll be a bump in the wall.
That's sometimes that could be because you created a thin spot. Sometimes that's an air bubble. There's like a million things that an wall inconsistency could be.
I think this is pretty much solid. I mean, when it collapses, it's not an air bubble.
Okay, noted,
So
noted.
that might be just a pressure.
Yeah, it could just be that at one point your fingers are using too much pressure, and then you're like raising that thin spot up, right?
That's what I do,
Yeah.
Mine flies off, actually.
Yeah, so if that happens, you're not having smooth, consistent wall pulling, right? So that's something to focus on. On a bowl too, I do like to compress the lip quite a bit, because once it gets to the height I want, I'm going to stretch that lip out. So this going from this diameter to this diameter is going to cut that lip in half, because it's that much clay stretched out. Does that make sense? So I'm really going to try to get as much of this outside sort of skirt clay up into my pot as I can, because again, we're sort of shooting for getting the most like bowl I can out of this amount of clay, right? And so now when I'm pulling just ever so slightly off to the side. It's not like this way yet, right? It's more of a sort of conical shape. And every once in a while I'll come in here and re-establish what my inside looks like. And now I'll probably start doing some of the pulls where I pull outwards. All right, now once it starts to be more of a bowl and less of a cylinder shape, I start to work much slower, just because any little inconsistency that happens is can be detrimental and make it collapse, right? So I usually work on a bowl roughly like here, right? And a little trick I will show you. The way I usually throw a bowl is with 2 ribs. Once I get it pretty thin, you can get a lot more bowl out of it by using ribs, because you don't have to use water. Ribs can sort of skate along dry clay a little bit easier than your fingers can. So we'll go over that once we get there, but I'm just gonna spend a little bit more time. And I'm sort of doing, it's mostly shaping at this point, right? But it's also still a pull, so that I'm not just losing height every time I go up. And I do still have quite a bit of clay here at the foot, which is inevitable. Like, you have to trim bowls, right? Unless you have a flat bottom bowl, like there's gonna be so much weight in the corners that you're gonna wanna trim it for sure. Especially with the rim, I'm very gentle at how long it takes me to pull out, right?
So, the few bowls I've made, what I'm interested to see is like the bulbous shape versus like that little, the bowls that go like this, the bowls that are straight edge.
So all that is like when I'm pulling, you can kind of see it happening here,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I'm
I pull
noticing.
out, and then once I get towards the top, I start pulling upwards. So it's not this all the way to the edge, it's sort of this, as far as the angle and like the pitch of my
That's how you're
fingers.
getting-
And that's how you end
yeah.
up with a more like, I
So
don't know,
it's- yeah,
a
I-
cuppy type bowl,
So
you know
it's
what I mean?
not just this, it's this and that.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh.
100%. So now I'm gonna come in with my rib and mostly be shaping here. And this is the same process as I would do with like a cylinder, right? Where I'm using a rib on the outside.
Something like a fruit bowl.
A little bit. So I'm just gonna lay this bowl down
Oops, sorry.
along where your rib goes. It's all good. Right, and then I'll check the outside shape. Again, outside shape is not so important to me because I'm gonna adjust that later when I'm trimming. What does the inside shape look like? Pretty good. It's not perfectly like smooth and consistent, so I may come in here with, if you have any sort of rounded tool, like you can use these, but one of these metal ribs will probably do you a little bit more solid. I'm just gonna spend a little bit more time cleaning this whole thing. I have special ribs I usually throw bowls with, but if you don't have those, you can just use one of these metal ribs.
You're smoothing it out, but you're also working to make that bulbous shape from the inside.
Yeah, because I want that to be like a smooth, consistent curve, right? This is gonna be tricky with these.
Yeah, I almost entirely use a rib to make the bowl shape.
Yeah,
I'm just
100%.
not confident enough to like throw.
But if you have like a hard corner in there, that's hard to do with a
Yeah.
rib, right? So just something to be mindful of.
Yeah,
So now I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna use 2 ribs now because I can get more out of it because I don't need to use as much water.
Round it on the inside and straight on the outside.
And I'm just going to try to lay this down. Like, I want to see how much width we can get out of this, right, before it starts to collapse. Ah, see, right there, it's starting to get weird.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Let's see if I can clean that up a little bit. And again, if this was moving really fast, like this for sure would have flopped.
So once you've opened it up that much, can you bring that lip back in at all?
Nope,
I would have done
not
I would've
really.
tried that, and it probably would have like cauliflower.
Yeah, when you try to collar in like wide things don't want to be skinny, right? You
Yeah.
have to start pretty skinny to then turn it skinnier. Once something's wide, it's kind of like wide.
Why things don't want to be skinny, that's pretty good.
Words to live by. And so this does have like a tiny bit of wobble to it, right? I'm not super concerned about it because like that's sort of the point of this whole exercise, right? Is to see like how much you can get out of a bowl before it starts to be like, no, I want to collapse.
So your intention was to make a wide bowl.
Yeah, I really wanted to see how much width, because I got like this one's like pretty tall and pretty wide, right? I want to see sort of like ramen bowl style with 3 pounds of clay, what like I'm comfortable with, right? So I'm just gonna sort of reset it so it's not quite as wobbly. Also, this is never gonna spin on someone's like kitchen counter, so it's not crazy important to me that it's perfect, because you're not gonna be able to tell when it's sitting flat, right?
More words to live by. It's never gonna spin on the kitchen counter.
And then when you said you do the rib on the inside and make the bowl shape, are you doing the wooden rib or this rib that he's doing?
I have like a special rib that I bought.
Yeah, a lot of it's funny at Potters, bowls are like a thing that we like. I have special bowl ribs because they're easier for me to use than like these
Yeah.
metal ones. These metal ones are tricky, and like this is probably not the best tool for the outside, which is why it caught, right? But like you got a decent amount of bowl out of there, especially after I trim it. Like it's gonna be like quite nice, like a sort of wide bowl like that. Does that make sense? So now what I would do, right? You can either start from the smallest, like on this series, I started from the 1 pound and then I tried to recreate it 2 times. For this series, I'm going to do the opposite, where I started with the biggest one and then I'm going to try to recreate it with the smaller 2. Another reason I do that is because oftentimes I'll throw my big one, it'll be 3 pounds and be like, this is as much as I could get out of here, right? Then I'll throw my 2 pounds and it'll be almost exactly as wide, which means I didn't quite get there on my first one. You know what I mean? So it's just sort of a fun way to see where your hands are the most comfortable. Because like I could probably throw this 2 pounds to be almost the same width as this. I feel like I could have gotten more out of here. You know what I mean? But I tried, it wanted to collapse, so I stopped. So just something to be mindful of, right? Where you start this 1, 2, 3 challenge will sort of dictate like where you find your comfortability in clay. Does anyone have any questions?
Is there a place you'd recommend us starting, like on the low to go high or high to go low?
I would probably start low to go high. The likelihood of your 3-piece one like coming out perfect, right? Just because it's a little bit bigger than everyone's used to throwing. It's not huge. Like this sort of vase I made here is 3 pounds, right? Like it's not gigantic, but it does feel like a lot of clay when you're first starting to get used to it. You know what I mean? So I would probably start at 1, then go to 2, then go to 3. You know what I mean? Once you feel a little comfortable, and then see how close you get. Cool? Cool. Great. Thanks, y'all.